Hello everyone, my name is Andy. I have around 12 years of experience working with Magento. In this series of tutorials, we will be discussing how to customize Magento admin grid using UI components. We will be discussing some conventional and non-conventional techniques to customize Magento admin grids. So let's begin. On the screen, you can see the official UI component documentation of Magento. This is something which you should refer whenever you're customizing the UI components. I also have one standard Magento 2.4.7 copy setup, which we'll be using throughout the series of tutorials. This copy is set up using Markshust Magento Docker repository. So let's begin. Now, in this series of tutorial, our first topic would be how we can use custom data provider to pass custom data to the admin grid. We will start by creating a basic module which we will be using throughout the series. Let's name it demo. And let's call the module name admin grids. So I'll be copying down some of the boilerplate codes which are required for our module initialization. First one would be registration.php file. I will copy it down from some other modules. Okay, so we have named our module as demo underscore admin grid. It's admin grid, so we will also have to rename this to admin grid. Sorry. The next mandatory file is our module.xml file, which lives under the etc folder. Here I have made this module dependent on Magento backend and Magento UI. Okay, so our basic module is being created. Now we'll run setup upgrade and check. Okay, so now we will run Magento setup upgrade to initialize this module and install it on our installation. Perfect, so the module is installed. The next step would be to set up all the basic functionalities like menu file, which will be used to display the link of our module in the menu, then the ACL for permissions, admin controllers, and the layout files. Because this is a backend module, everything comes under an admin HTML folder. The first file will be our routes file. In the route file, we will define the front name of our module, which I think should be grids because we're experimenting with the grids. Okay, so the route ID should be admin because this is an admin module. The ID should be unique, which we have made it as grid, and we also named the front name as grids. The next thing will be to set up a menu for this. So here we have created a link for the menu where grids will be our main menu and the custom data provider will be a sub menu item. To explain it in bit detail, this ID is the ID for the menu. This is the title and this is the module where this menu belongs to. Resource is the ID of our ACL permissions, which we will be creating further. Same way, the one module which we are creating now will be named as custom data provider. Its link is added over here, with parent being the grids menu. Now the next step will be to create an ACL file. We named it as a custom grids DB for the module that we are creating, and this is the parent item. Alright, now if we run the cache flush, we will be able to see the entry of the module in our admin component. Okay, now clearing the caches, and we'll be able to see the module in our backend. See, here is the module grids, and inside it our screen name, that's custom data provider. Currently it will throw 404 because we haven't created a controller for this. Now we'll be creating a backend controller for this particular page, which will be named as custom data provider. We will be creating a folder called controller, and inside the controller we'll be naming it exactly as what we have added in the path of the controller in the menu, which is grids. This is the front name of our module, which is grids. Custom is the folder name which we will have to create, and custom data provider will be the file name. So inside create controller, we'll be creating a directory called custom, and inside the custom we'll be creating a file named custom data provider. This is the controller for our screen, custom data provider. Okay, let's write some code. I'll try to copy down some of the codes that I've already written, because these are very much boilerplates which we normally use for the controllers. Okay, so this is the namespace, that's demo admin grid controller admin HTML. Okay, we missed a very important point. Because this is an admin HTML controller, it comes under admin HTML. And this is necessary to remember, otherwise Magento will consider this module as a front-end controller, which is wrong. I'm moving this custom under admin HTML. Alright, controller, admin HTML, custom, and custom data provider. Now it seems correct. Some of the files that we have imported is Magento backend app action context, page factory, and HTTP interface. We have created a constructor and the execute function, which sets up the active menu as this one. This becomes the active menu, and this is the breadcrumb that we will be adding, which is grids. Under grid it's custom, and then custom data provider is our screen name, and we are returning the result. Now we will have to bind this controller with our layout. So we will go to etc. Yeah. So now we will be creating a front-end layout file. So we will create a folder named view. Inside it again, it will be admin HTML, similar to how we did it for controller. Then layout, because we are creating the layout file, and the name of the file. It is very important to make sure that the name of controller and the layout file correctly matches and follows the naming convention. Otherwise, the layout file won't work. And the naming convention is something like this. So it should be, first is the route name, which is grids. Then the folder name that we created, it's custom, and then the controller name, custom data provider. All can be in the lowercase. So this is our layout file for custom data provider. Inside this layout file, we'll be doing one major thing. We'll be referencing our component, which we'll be creating further inside this. So here is the code for sync. What we did was, we are setting up a reference container and adding the name of the UI component, which will be used for this particular layout. And the name is grids custom data provider underscore list. You can name it anything. I usually follow the convention where I name it as a layout file underscore list because it's a listing template. All right. So next thing will be, we'll be creating a UI component directory. And we'll be naming the file exactly as this. Ensure there is no mistakes in the naming of layout files and component files. Otherwise, your grid won't work and you will waste a lot of time. Most of the new developers working on Magento face this issue. Now, this is a lengthy and repetitive task, but we will be accomplishing that also. So now we'll be adding a component to this file. First being XML version, then everything that is added comes under listing. Now we'll be passing the data arguments over here. Okay, so I will just explain you briefly what we have passed. We have passed our data arguments with following configuration. One being the JS configuration, and the data provider will be this one. This is the name of our data provider, which is usually a combination of our component name and component name with underscore as data source. This is the dependency. So this data provider depends on the same one because it doesn't have cross-module dependency. That's why we'll be passing the same thing over here. And this is the spinner. Spinner basically is a loader that is loaded when some request is being processed. So usually the spinner should have the name of the columns, because whenever you see a particular screen being loaded, you will be seeing a loader on top of the columns. So whichever name you pass over here, the loader will be rendered over there. So the name is usually the columns. Now, we passed this data provider, but we never created the data source for this. So this will be the next step. Now we'll be creating the data source. We are creating this data source with the name exactly as what we have passed over here. Grids custom data provider underscore list underscore data underscore source. And this is the component for the grid provider. This is a standard Magento component which will be rendering the standard grid. These are the different settings which we are doing. The storage config will be ID. This is the primary field of the custom grid. Now this storage config is very necessary if we are going to use the pagination, because Magento grid caches the data using the primary key which is passed over here. If this is incorrectly passed or it's wrong, then there is a high chance or there will be errors in your pagination. So your data won't be cached and there can be problems. This is the update URL for rendering your grid data. So an edit request will be fired over here and the data will be rendered using this. If you want, you can also change this URL to something else. Like let's say I will change it to reports or anything which you want, but this is the standard one. ACL is a permission that we created. It's again for access control. Now, this is the most important part for this particular tutorial. What we are doing here is we are passing a class of the data provider over here. And the name of this data provider is exactly the same as this, the data source name. What we have passed is a custom data provider where we'll be passing on the custom content. It can be anything. It can be a JSON data. It can be a custom array. It can be a data coming from someplace else. So the job of the data provider is to process this data and convert it into a format that grid accepts. So we are passing the class over here. And in the further steps, we'll be also creating this class and discussing further on it. Request field name and the primary field name is the field. The request field name is used when you're having an options like select or anything like that. So This request field will be referenced when you do an action on selection, whether it's a single selection or multiple selection. Primary field, as it's quite obvious from the definition, it's a unique field of that particular data. Now comes the next stage. Magento has a very cool listing toolbar. So there are lots of features which comes with the listing toolbar. If everything is going to be standard, you need to pass some standard values and everything should start working as expected. So we are passing some of the things over here. First is the name, then the settings, whether this will be a sticky or not. So sticky true will make the menu sticky. Bookmarks. So we are passing the bookmarks, we are passing the column controls, we are passing the filters, and we are passing the paginations. I will show you these components once we complete this component file. Alright, so now comes the turn of creating the columns. How you can create columns in the grid. There is no specific limitations of the columns. You can create as many columns as you want in the grids. Now we will start with creating some of the sample columns. Now observe the name of these columns. This will be exactly as the one which we passed in the spinners. And the reason behind is whenever the data is loading, a loader icon will be displayed on top of these columns so that no other actions can be completed or done. Now because we had passed one primary field, we'll be creating that column also. So column name ID, settings, label. This is the label translate true, sortable false. I have made this sortable false because I don't want this particular record to be sortable enough. There are different options that can be passed to columns. So whenever you click on any particular column, that column does a sorting automatically. But if you pass it as false, the sorting is not possible. So there is one column called ID that I have created. Now let's create a column called name. Now this is another column called name. And I have passed one more property over here. It's filter. So this name will be a filterable property where you will be getting a text box to filter the name. And the data type of this will be text. Now let's pass another column called city. Maybe it's the simple city. And again, it's sortable false. And last but not the least, let's pass a column name column. The column name company. I've added a different type of filter over here. It's a text range filter. So you can filter the content based on some ranges from this to this. There are many other filters that you can also implement. One most important being dates. We will be using all these filters and we will be customizing these filters in our upcoming series of tutorials. So I'm not going much into detail about. We will be discussing these filters and discussing how to customize these filters in our upcoming tutorials. So I'm not going much deeper into this. And yes, so the basic structure of our UI component file is created. Okay, so let's do a small and quick recap. What we have done is we have passed data provider, we have created the data source, we have created the listing toolbar, and we have created the columns. In the data provider, we have passed custom class. This is demo admin grid UI component data provider custom. Now the next step will be to create this custom class. But before doing that, let's see what happens if we don't create a class correctly. So we get an error. The error is argument 1 object or class must be an object or a valid class name, whereas we are simply giving the string name. So the reason behind that is we have passed the class but we have not created it. So now let's create a custom data provider. This can be any path which you wish, but for the sake of understanding, I usually specifically name it as UI component data provider. Okay, we'll have to change the okay, so we have now created custom data provider file. This custom extends the data provider class of Magento, which is this one. And we will name it as UI data provider. It will be extending this class. I will show you what's done inside this class. So the main function that we will be referencing would be get data. So this class is responsible, or this method, sorry. So the main method that we'll be looking into is this one. This get data method is responsible for sending the data to the data grid. There are other methods also which you can override as and where needed. Okay, so let's begin. Now, because we are extending a class, we will have to pass the constructor properties of this particular class. So there are many classes that needs to be referenced. I've already created some code for us which we can utilize and reuse. Alright, so without going much into detail, I will explain what I have done. Because we are extending this UI data provider, it is necessary to create a constructor exactly as how the parent class is. So what we have done is, we have simply taken this constructor, all the classes, and pass it over here. Here we are calling the parent constructor. In this tutorial, we will be also using search criteria builder. This search criteria builder gets all the results of search being done on the grid, whether it's the search filtered search or it's a pagination. Alright, so let's go with the data. Let's overwrite the get data method of our parent data provider. Now this method is responsible for passing the data to the admin grid. The purpose of this tutorial was to pass the custom data instead of data fetching from any database. Now, the important thing is structure of the data should exactly match the column name that we have defined over here. So we have 4 columns, that is ID, name, city, company. And this data is basically an array of the items. So let's create this items array. So we are creating one empty array. I will be passing some static values over here. This is item 1, this is item 2, this is item 3, this is item 4. So the first thing was ID. So let's call the ID as 1. Then it was name, which is test underscore name, city and company. I've simply copied down this row and will change the values. As I mentioned, ID should always be unique. Okay, jump to So this is the data format that is usually needed. It's an array with the keys of the array matching exactly the column names, and the value can be anything that you want. We simply now have to return this array of items. So there are two records that are usually returned, one being total records, which we can return as, let's say, count of total items. It shows how many total number of records are there, and items being item. All right, so let's see. Fingers crossed, and let's do a reload. Perfect. So you can see there are 4 columns exactly as we defined and the records that we passed on. These are the filters that we created, with company being a range filter and name being the text filter. These are the other different options which we have in a admin grid. So this is the column control and this is the bookmark. Now, what happens if we have a duplicate ID? So we still got 2 records over here, but the last one, that is the Rohit one, was replaced for the previous one also, and the record came from Rohit. What if some column name is wrong? Let's say it's company name, and then there will be no value. So it is quite imperative that the key of the array and the column name should exactly match. The total number of records that we have passed is also shown over here. Now anything we do over here, whenever we enter something and click apply filter, it will first come over here in the get data, where we can read different search criteria and process the data. This is not currently under this scope of tutorial, but we'll be discussing further as we move. This is not part of this tutorial, but we'll be discussing further as we move ahead. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.